Okay, well, I will go as loud as possible for the volume, and I'll start. If you guys are okay with this, I'll kick off, and hopefully you can all hear me. If not, I am sure it's going to be recorded, and hopefully that will, you'll be able to watch that back just in case you have missed it. Of course, you guys are probably going to end up after this session. Well, then we got one closing keynote from the legendary Tariq about humanization, which I'm definitely sad that I'm not able to make today. I've just been talking to his colleague, Phil. I'm sure he's also sad that he's not there to be able to do it. Last year was an absolute pleasure having an opportunity to be in Portland again with everybody. But let me just give you a bit of I know we've got the next 45 minutes to talk about, hopefully, a topic which will set the stage behind maybe some of Jason's very forward thinking about how AI is going to impact everybody in their life, and also maybe moving that forwards a little bit to talk about the impact that you guys can start making today. The photo you see is from last week. I was in Vienna doing the opening keynote following Dorothy Graham talking about 50 years of automation. Part of it is, what does the next 50 years look like? Now, the only slide that I've got, a lot of people haven't heard of Keysight, where I am at the moment, but it's the original Dave and Bill Packard. It's the original creation of Silicon Valley in that garage. And why is it so important? It's important because we're redefining how we build and test. And I think a lot of the conversations, a lot of the panel discussion, what I just overheard, is talking about, well, how do we operate in this new landscape? And I think a lot of this is about, well, how do we get superpowers? How do we get to the point where we're able to, compete to everybody else? Now, there was a great session that Jason did a couple of weeks ago in California, where he was talking about the fact that you need to be using these tools and these kind of technologies approaches before the devs and the PMs and everybody else does. This is really a rallying call to talk about how, as an industry, we need to move forwards before everybody else does and start leveraging some of this amazing technology and embrace it and not be scared of maybe some of the challenges that have happened in the last definitely 2 to 3 years, where there's been concerns around maybe the transparency and scalability and trustworthiness of AI. So part of these tools and the talk today around turning testers into superheroes was really leveraging that technology. And what I've done, because obviously I'm remote and apologies I can't be there, I've set up Slido to take questions. Of course, at the end, we'll go through and take the panel discussion. But, for people who've used Slido in the past, you can just go to slido.com and then just put PNSQC in there. And then I'll be able to take questions if there's anything at the end where you'd like to ask. You can also be anonymous if you're not wanting to put your hand up in-house, or if you're on the Zoom link. So hopefully that'll give people a bit of options as well. So, they referred to me as the automation cyborg that's, sent back from the future to help save the world from bad software. I'd like to take this kind of, not too likely, I suppose, but I even realized that a lot of the talks that I actually do, I still can't predict some of the outcomes of what's changed, what's happened. And, when we're looking in these kind of inspirational talks, we're looking forwards, but we're also hoping that what we talk about will actually come to fruition. It will be, potentially stuff that will change and revolutionize our industry. Now, 7 years ago, I did a TED talk, which was around cognitive engineering. It was about artificial intelligence and around evolution and not revolution. It was around the incremental improvement of the processes and designs, not a big bang, not a massive change, not a revolutionary technology like Gen AI. It was all about incremental improvement consistently. And I think that changes the way that things are doing. Hopefully the program chair's okay with everything at the moment. But part of it is, even back then in 2017, I got some things wrong. I had, as you can probably see on the screen now, I had a huge, massive amount of technology, which was, talking about capabilities, what were happening. And one of them was around cognitive reckoning. The other one is human augmentation. It was around this blending of human in the loop or tester in the loop that really could help drive our industry and potentially look at leveraging some of this technology to help us become specialists in whatever domain it might be. You might not be I know autonomous driving level 3 versus level 7 standards, but you can use this technology to unleash those kind of capabilities. So cognitive reckoning, or the ability to understand, is getting better and better. This is why we're so excited about this kind of technology. Now, of course, Tariq and Jason, who are there today in Portland, we got into quite a bit a discussion panel on an AI discussion panels a few weeks ago around this kind of progress within this kind of industry and around machine learning. And of course, it's getting to that critical point where it's outperforming natural language generation, which is a subset of course, natural language processing, which is again a subset of machine learning, which is a subset of artificial intelligence. So even though we've heard so much noise about it, I still date it back to, Bletchley Park, when, a few miles away from where I live, where the original papers around the singularity was, around the original papers around Turing's work. And, we're seeing that today. We're seeing that same nod that this was kind of already anticipated, and what we were kind of expecting was, what is the evolutional next step that we have to, as engineers, take this and drive it to the next level. And that's why I put that reference at the start around Bill and Dave, because 1939, of course, they were doing build and test. They were doing the incremental development. And of course, this year's been a big year because of the original memos of over 100, well, exactly 100 years ago, that were published around testing. Is, yes, we've used this, let's call it engineering passion or whatever else you'd like to describe it, but we've been testing for 100 years. But we've also seen how quickly people like Dave and Bill are able to, bring products to market to revolutionize the industry, and how these new tools and techniques have also revolutionized how we work. So, yes, 1939, originally they were building the first piece of test equipment. That test equipment went over to Disney, which is where I was a couple of weeks ago, and actually was used, the RF hardware, you create the first stereo sound in Fantasia back in 1939. But those principles and practices, and I'm going to use the word hardware a lot today, based on, I think, we don't think about the hardware abstraction level. Of course, I'd say that coming from a £4 billion pure play largest testing company on the planet, which build hardware, they build Wi-Fi, the new 7G standard. They're doing all of the next generation quantum computing capabilities. Part of it is we're looking forwards and we're testing tomorrow's technology today, but we need to be able to test that. And this is where I think we unlock this capability. And I sent this to Jason last week when I was, hanging out with my friend Diego, who's one of the lead analysts at Forrester. And I've been working with Diego. He published his first work on Turing bots back in 2019, which is slightly before GPT and everything started getting so noisy. And what he started talking about, rightly or wrongly, as far as the naming convention, was around Turing bots, a nod to Alan, of course. And, we discussed this many times. And what his vision, or the vision that he was trying to predict for the industry, which we're seeing today from people like Checky.ai and beyond, is we're looking at these AI agents that exist. I hate the term AI agents, but let's call them, an agent that's able to talk to other agents that exist within the SDLC. So Checky, for instance, talks very much within that bottom section around testing, right? But if testing was going to test something like the new European Accessibility Act, it needs to then maybe pass that back to design, where they need to rethink the design and the mock-ups to make sure that they can actually deal with the haptics, with the short sighted, the contrast modes and everything else. So part of it is, these should not be in isolation. They should not be a tool that gives a whole stack of results. It should be an intelligent, autonomous agent that can talk to other parts within the SDLC and actually solve them. So part of it is, yes, it may feel like magic. It may feel like generative AI is exciting and it can unlock new capabilities, but actually it's around bringing that into the ecosystem, bringing that into the SDLC. And people always ask me, WTF, which is what's the future? And so part of it is, again, we can look forwards at autonomous and quantum and automation fabric and all these kind of great technologies. But what do they actually mean? What do they mean to people here? And it was last year when I was at the Portland event, when actually I shared this hype cycle. So this was August 2023, and it was hot off the press. And I know, speaking to Moss afterwards, he kind of said, "Oh, can you share this report?" I said, "I can." And, it's on eggplantsoftware.com if you want to download it today, for free. But part of it, the reason why we were so excited about the report at the time is it stuck AI-augmented testing right at the top of the wave. And you might have seen the video that I did today talking about next year is going to be two giant waves. One of them is going to be the AI-augmented capability within Gartner, and then the Turing bots within Forrester. So any tool, this could be GitHub for Copilot, it could be all sorts of other tools, it could be Cursor for IDEs. All these tools are classed as AI productivity, but they're also classed as AI-augmented, which means it's this ability to help provide you with additional productivity gains so that you can keep up at the pace of everyone else in the organization. And I think that's where it's really interesting. We talk about this, we've been talking about this a year and a half, 2 years. And, at the start, it was just pure noise and hype and opinion. Whereas now, we've been building an AI platform, an AI augmented platform for the last 2 years. And we released it originally, and it was a great code generation tool, and we got very excited about it, and it felt like Copilot. But we didn't realize that that's not what they actually wanted. People wanted something that actually could give them value. And where people spend most of their time isn't around creating automation, it's around helping support you on those activities, those holistic testing activities that are much wider. And so I genuinely stand against this number. Originally that I spoke at Google DeepMind about this, and I said, "Oh, it's 35%." And then I sat down with Diego on Thursday in London, and he turned around and he said, "You're right. It is about 35%." Now, of course, I said 35% by 2024, or actually, it was an analyst firm that put it together. But actually, they're already recording this 15 to 20% productivity gain. Now, it's interesting. I mean, if you read the small print slightly on here, it's saying assisted in the loop with SDLC. So this is part of, you are giving human augmentation, they're looking at the results, and you're adding the human I'm going to call it overlord for a second, is involved. Whereas the next stage is really around improved collaboration. It's around these Turing bots talking to you whilst they're looking at what you're looking at the screen. And I know that feels like a violation for a second, but if it's looking at a screen and you're saying, well, actually, I need some synthetic data generation, or I need the environment to be wiped. Part of it is it wants to help you do better jobs. So to unlock this next productivity gain, and yes, you can quickly say, well, we've already seen people like GitHub who publicize that the code quality impact of using this technology is 300, 400% worse code quality, meaning that we've got 300% more work to do. As Jason keeps on running the numbers in his head and saying, well, actually, we're still going to probably do the same amount of testing proportionally. It's still, it's just we're going to need to utilize these tools, and we're going to need to utilize these tools and technologies before somebody else does. Now, I usually run a workshop for this, and I sit there and go, of course, you can probably see some of the things in here, building large language model routers, bringing everything offline, creating a graph, RAG architecture, using EdgeML, building this completely offline, learning the context-sensitive validation, feeding in sources of knowledge from documentation, like Dots. I was chatting with Dorothy Graham last week about one of my favorite books, which was Documentation. Talk of bringing all that knowledge in, building graphs, knowledge graphs that actually explain how your particular organization in your industry works. This is much more complex than ChatGPT. And, as I've probably said a number of times, ChatGPT probably gives you an idea of the kind of capabilities, but to unlock this, you have to think about the next evolution. Now, of course, even today, it's speaking to people about Clippy and this rebirth. The last time I was in the Santa Clara offices at Microsoft HQ, is they're bringing in things like Microsoft Graph, which is not a graphing platform. It's a platform that enables you to store knowledge centrally. And I was just chatting with 3 people outside, and they were like, "So it's reading my emails." And people like James Whitaker, predicted this 10 years ago. And part of it is it's bringing all that information to make sure that those subject matter experts and those what was single points of failure doesn't exist. Is the human in the loop aspect means that it's truly starting to capture and understand behaviors and complexity of systems, the stuff that Tom Gilb was talking about in 1970s with Language and Evo and all this kind of aspirational kind of viewpoint. So it's upsetting. Clippy might be coming back, and it may come back in multiple disguises, but it's going to be there to help. It's not going to be just saying to you, do you want to learn how to left incline or bold some text? This is going to be looking at what you're doing and saying, this looks like you're trying to pull some reports out of SAP. The way you customize this, you'd be better to get the data straight in from these raw formats. How about I pull that in for you? It's really about enabling you to the next level. And so again, this isn't my slide, so I can't take any credibility. But partly what was interesting about last week was this idea of redefining the SDLC. Again, I've been talking to people about that today, and they were kind of terrified from a ITIL, CMMI kind of process perspective of we've seen Agile come along, we've seen DevOps come along, we've seen the disruption of trying to release faster and quicker. Now you're talking about things like GenOps and this next generation of capabilities where certain Turing bots are going off and building this. We've talked about things like Citizen Developer, where people are using low-code platforms to build their own application estates. When will the madness end? Because we have to look after these. These have to have business blueprints and DNA that actually makes our organization smarter. So these are big challenges. They're also new opportunities. And so what I did like about this, and I'm going to definitely be slandered for this for a small period of time, was new roles. We're saying that actually the developer or the tester footprint will become more transparent and will not have any boundaries to it. Will be able to step into areas where it may not have stepped in before, into chaos engineering, into requirements engineering and your software requirement specifications, and getting into different areas and jumping around, but without any kind of tag that says you are resource X. You will just be something that's working unified within a for the greater good across the organization, but you will dip in. And this isn't saying you should be a master of everything and you shouldn't specialize. This is talking about that this new world will potentially have new opportunities, definitely for a new generation. So super exciting, super scary. I'm going to take a slight water at the time because I know we've got plenty of time. But also, as you can, I apologize for the bottom right-hand corner of this image. You can tell there was someone's head in the way. But I was at Gartner a few weeks ago, and they pushed out the Gen AI landscape. And again, it was fascinating because it was kind of talking about what we'd already talked about. Like I said, first time in 6 years where they're going to do a quadrant next year, and it's going to feature test vendors, product tools, development tools, all in the same quadrant. Instead of having a test automation quadrant or a testing quadrant, the boundaries are going to get blurred over. But more importantly, the predictions of what they're talking about, the capabilities they're talking about, again, are really important. Things like domain-specific models, something that I was fighting for a long time to be against, was saying, well, I don't want to fine-tune a automotive model that knows automotive with a graph that sits behind it. I want it to learn just the organization and not be the tail wagging the dog, where it potentially could bring in 1, 2, 3, 4 models running simultaneously, trying to compete against each other, trying to kind of prompt thread the problem. I didn't want that to happen, but in actual fact, it probably is another axiom that I hadn't thought about. Understanding what your organization, how your organization works, the dictionary of terms. Large language models are just a dictionary of terms. They're a knowledge of the world, a bad knowledge of the world, which overlays onto this. The actual real knowledge needs to be expressed in a format that's not polluted by this. So part of what we're trying to actually achieve here is actually understand, yes, I'm going to have a model that is I am Toyota, and that's how we do things, lean, whatever, Kanban methodologies we use, plus all of the different ways that we manufacture all of our different products. Then you overlay that with automotive, but it might not just be automotive. Toyota might make other products in different domains, in military and healthcare. We don't know. So part of it is it has multiple domains that map to verticals, and it incrementally explodes. So domain-specific models is really interesting on here. Edge ML, which is in the bottom left-hand corner, that is picking my phone up. That's the 16 Pro Max NPU that sits on the phone, is the neural processing unit that's running on Apple Intelligence, can run everything at the edge. It doesn't need to run in the cloud, doesn't need to run on dedicated hardware. My laptop now has an NPU on it. Both laptops do. I'm not using GPUs. I'm using neural processing units so that I can sit these large action models, these complex systems, the computing capabilities at the edge, and it should never leave my device. Now, again, this is a revolutionary way of looking at how we actually build these things. So, moving slightly on, I said I was wrong. I was definitely wrong. 7 years ago, I said, well, what isn't it going to take? What jobs isn't it going to take away? And the jobs that it wasn't going to take away were going to be things like musicians. It was going to be things like artists. Ironically, they were the ones that went first. We've all seen DALL-E. We've all seen these tools that can create incredible images. We've seen the GANs being around for such a long time that they can fool humans. We've now seen things like music, Sumo, that can create a track that sounds incredible in whatever type of style you want, in whatever language you want. These generative tools are starting to potentially outperform areas that didn't really need to go after. It should have gone after, the boring stuff, the economics and accounting and stuff that seemed to be the way that it should have targeted first. So you don't really know where you're going to predict this stuff, but we can all agree potentially on one thing. And that one thing is, it's not an AI that's going to replace you. It's another person, as Jason said, who's using AI. And that could be cross-domain. They could be some other people in your team that are already ahead of where you need to be. And it's not keeping up with the Joneses here. This is literally, I need to enable myself to be more productive so I can, outperform the next person that wants my job. And this is quite scary for a lot of us, I suppose, because, when I started in automation 25 years ago, I thought to myself, it's great, I've got 25 years of experience. But of course, Dot's got 50 years of experience. Part of it is experience and wisdom is incredibly key. It's when you augment that with these kind of capabilities that really stand up. Now, I'm sure there's a few people in the room, the ones that are trying to listen to this analog version of Jonathon in a box. But that tiny little Jonathon in a box who's kind of saying, maybe you don't need to know about graph neural networks. Maybe you don't need to know about relative generative answering. You just need to know enough that you understand how that actually works and how, it's based on the information that you feed into the system. And you might also need to know about things that are coming along, like large vision models, lava models that can actually give visualization capabilities to understand what's going on. Stuff like YOLO, which you only look once, but also things like large action models, which I genuinely believe are probably the end of maybe the automation. People who've been running around for a long time, like myself, talking about how automation is going to help. I think that might start disappearing. And again, it will refocus on humans being the most important thing here. That human augmentation is the person and the people that have got that wisdom, they've got that knowledge, they've got that experience, they know the domain. Maybe they don't know everything about the latest compliance and regulatory. Maybe they don't know every spec of every single component that exists in their organization. That's where the human augmentation is designed for. We did this survey, which I did share last year in Portland, but, part of it is what were the main use cases? And, we thought it was around generative capabilities. We thought the whole cursor, the whole, Copilot for GitHub, that was going to be the game-changing kind of capability within generative AI. But actually coding is a very subset of that. And I think, like art, I think, part of it is, yes, you could argue that all the code that ever needed to be written has already been written in whatever language it may be. But, that isn't the main value proposition. It's the assisting you with, okay, well, maybe I don't know OWASP vulnerabilities, and I'm not keeping up with the latest list. Maybe I just need enough information that allows me to maybe pull the information into a format and generate some zap tests or whatever it may be to pass on to the security team so that they can actually then say, oh, okay, from an incident perspective, CrowdStrike, probably not a great thing. They still need to have the experts, but you need to be able to hand off that information in a format that they can process it. Now, I said human in the loop. I said augmented intelligence, or human augmentation back in the TED talk. But that's what it is. It's down to, we've been talking about data, maybe too much. We've been talking about our industry, which unfortunately we do sit under this thing called information and technology. And we're great at technology. Communication and the exchange of information is still a challenge. And you could say, well, that's not completely true, Jonathon, but you could probably say or nearly agree that knowledge will get you so far that actually it's the human aspect, the wisdom of an understanding of, well, that's just not going to work. That's a human trait. That's something that's never going to be replicated by a system. You might say, oh, well, in 10, 15 years, general intelligence, blah, blah, blah. Yes, I'm sure we'll revisit it at that point in time. But I think at the moment, the human in the loop is still the most important thing to take away from this session. Now, of course, that said, we all sat there a couple of weeks ago in California and we said, come to our workshop, right? Come to our workshop and we'll show you the future. And we all got very excited about prompt engineering and maybe what exciting stuff that has to offer. And then we kind of also had a bit of epiphany and all kind of agreed that maybe prompt engineering is not the future. And it's not this, 320,000 starter salary opportunity to be an AI whisperer that's going to make the whole difference in this new world, because these systems are probably going to evolve past a text input to a point where it's more that cognitive capability is more like Neuralink. It's more about plugging it directly into somebody who's got that experience and then them interfacing with the actual system. So even though we've massively just thrown out our best workshops, and I'm doing this exact workshop in Lithuania next week for TestCon, I think, part of it is there still is some great work to be done there. And I don't think not learning this stuff is the way to go forwards. I think part of it is you need to rationalize it. You need to think about, well, yes, I might be talking to a large language model at the moment, but when I'm talking to a large action model, well, what's the difference? Well, the large action model will be, if you're at the Dreamforce in San Francisco a few weeks ago when XLAM came and hit the world and said it supports natively 12% of the entire internet application estate, not web pages. Anybody can a web page, right? But 12% of all exaps that exist in the world. So if you say to it Photoshop and I want you to do some filter using some kind of layering system, it knows how to do that. It knows how to launch that up. It knows how to use other tools that can give similar kind of effects. So you're still going to be doing not prompts, but you're going to be interacting with these complex systems of systems. You're still going to have to give it a large action model is visualization of thought. Visualization of thought is a goal. You need to say to it, I'd like to remove the backdrop from my current video feed. And I don't want to know how to use Photoshop. I don't want to know how to go off and use Adobe Premiere. I just want to pass it a file. I don't even want to call it an MP4, 4K, 120 frames per second. I just want to say, you go and do that, come back with the results. So part of it is you still need these mission statements. You still need to understand what are the goals that you're wanting to achieve. And you got to be able to articulate that in a very structured manner. This is the problem, is the ambiguity of the system, how you interact with the systems. The same is, I think there's some nuances. This stuff that you can geek out with Jason about and say, well, if you ask it this stuff, it does genuinely make a difference. And, some of it is crazy. Some of it's, I'll pay you $2,000 and or I'll lose my job if you don't give me a response. And they do work, right? There is little tips and tricks, little Easter eggs that exist in the system. Equally, which Jason does very well, what prompt should have I asked? Is the standard response for everything is tell me the prompt that I should have done. Same as a large action model is tell me the goal that I should have described. Tell me what, how I could have better structured the mission statement. Maybe I should have included a cost or a time parameter or another axiom. So again, this is still learnings. It's not wiping them off. And here's a picture, ironically, from PNSQC last year, which was great. Now, I'm on the final frontier now before we start kind of opening up into questions. But partly where my head's disappeared into this kind of ether, shall we say, is not only lazy writing from the Marvel franchise around the idea of the multiverse, but I think partly this concept, and it was, again, I can't give full credit for this, but it was one of my developers, my quantum guy who, Jason's worked with in the past, who said, I just don't understand why I'm doing this prompt tuning. Why am I, going and trying to refine this to get the best prompt when really I should allow the variant to just run in natural course, and I should be utilizing these threads to run in parallel that utilize a certain amount of processing or NPU time, compute time, to actually go off and say, what happens if you were an archaeologist or you were an anthropologist or you were a systems thinking professor like Dr. Emma Langdon? If you met that kind of thought process, how would you think about testing the system differently and spin up these billions of different permutations? And if nothing happens, no value comes out of it, great. But if something is caught within one of those threads where you're saying, well, actually, now Clippy comes back with a response saying, did you really think about not adding any, on your Swagger spec, you've not got a defined variable. It should have been true, 1 and 0, but you set it to just be an integer. You think this was a smart idea. It might have caught something which might not be interesting to you, but it might be interesting to a dev who's in Cursor going, oh, well, yeah, I can fix that. Let me quickly look at the requirement. Yeah, that was supposed to be an on or off. It wasn't supposed to be ambiguous. These threads and these prompts, this multi-prompt verse is going to be something that could potentially help solve and feed some of these intelligent Turing agents. The second to last kind of big kind of question is around the European AI Act, and of course the equivalent executive order around never using public-facing GPTs, right? This was the big kind of getaways. You should not be passing anything that's IP sensitive, and people be like, oh, well, it's fine. I'm using a tenanted version of OpenAI. That's fine, but you're still responsible for the security, and maybe still you should not be sharing information, maybe ITAR regulated information with a system that you can't track or have auditability. So these new laws that are coming in are going to help regulate. They're going to improve that transparency and trustworthiness, and they're going to start putting safeguards in place, because at the moment, it still is very much the Wild West. Now, the other thing which I keep on talking about, I'm sure everyone here in the audience before, I know you're all wanting to go for a beer and also listen to Tariq's session, but part of it is you've all seen Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, this idea of having Babelfish, in essence, this ability to say, well, yeah, I'm not a coder, but also it doesn't matter that I'm not a coder, but it's also what am I interacting with? I talked about those models, running 6 or 7 models simultaneously, is I could be looking at something that's very good at identifying requirements and translating them into language by Tom Gill to put a structure around them, or into Gherkin or something else. But I could also be, using some digital twin definition language modeling notation that I also need to interpret and understand. There's going to be different models that can understand and process that. And on the right-hand side, which is not as exciting, but partially should be exciting, is there's a whole section around, we now run what we call multi-language execution. So we'll write things in Python, JavaScript, markup, and we'll blur the lines together so that they all run side by side. So this is really exciting, right? And I know we're just about to get into Q&A, but I won't run one of those videos. But part of these next generation technologies, it's not quite as simple as your Chat GPT, which you can press on your action button and it starts listening to GPT-O for your Omni capabilities. Actually, this technology does require a lot of complexity. And when you look at things like neurosymbolic programming, which, yes, is just an abstraction layer, which we're all very familiar with, but being able to actually understand and interpret that and then process vision, not just voice, vision of understanding of system progress, where it's going through, understand traffic, understand what's going at a PCAP level, understand and discover the system. These technical layers are incredibly complex and also require a certain level of interaction with the system under test. And then bigger and wider to that, things like data lake houses, understanding the delta of huge amounts of information, complex information that you're also able to feed back into the system so that you can actually learn from what you're doing, mine some of that processing data, plus be able to represent some of the graph knowledge that you've obtained from those discovery, understanding that 42% of your users are doing a weird behavior, but it's only happening during Halloween or something. So visualization of thought is going to be a big thing. I'd recommend everyone to check out XLAM or OpenLAM models that exist today if you want to play around with them. There's Hugging Face and lots of other sites you can go and look at. But anyway, as promised, I wanted to give 10 minutes of Q&A. So if you guys have got any questions, of course, you can add them onto Slido. Of course, if the organizer wants to just come off or unshare my screen, I'm happy to take a few questions to the audience and before Tariq's amazing closing keynote.
We have about 10 minutes for questions. I don't know if Jonathan can hear me when I'm talking like this.
I can hear you perfectly, yeah.
Okay. Does anybody have a question for Jonathan? Anybody curious about the ethics of AI or the limits of AI or what sort of model that he might suggest for something? No questions right here? Here's one.
Jonathan, do you envision in the AI future here, AI policing itself so that we know the good actors from the bad actors?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So obviously Jason has a website called Open Test where he runs a whole stack of testing tests like ISTQB against different models. I love the idea of the regulation around an AI, and this is, I don't know if you've ever listened to the audiobook or the book called Life 3.0, but this is exactly that. It's talking around, in essence, having this, I'm going to call it a playground or sandbox or contained environment where you can actually allow it to go through its training process, and you're able to use in essence, your ML ops kind of things like ML flow to look at your toxicity scores to start making a decision whether or not this tuned version or this TensorFlow algorithm is performing as it should. And then, of course, there'll be some guide rails around things like data drift and measuring that over time, and then trying to compensate for that. Absolutely, I think part of, and it's something I'm working with the BSI with at the moment, is having those not only safeguards, but actually have that ability to understand and experiment, and also understand how potentially your model's performing in comparison to, and this might not be reference points to other industry models, but it might be saying something like, if you take a mixtural event experts or a pixel, which is the new large vision model from those guys, you might look at it and then compare that against a dedicated, more optimized model, and then say, okay, well, there's advantages and disadvantages, and it might be you want to apply this for, let's say, one of the projects we're doing at the moment is around MRI scans. If you find a particular model performs better than other things, how do you allow that rigor and auditability? Because auditability is the absolute truth, a critical component to prove that you're using things like TRISM. So TRISM is a trustworthy, I'd highly recommend checking out the AI TRISM framework, but it's a methodology that allows you to help provide that level of visibility and potentially those guardrails that could help AI release AI. But I think it's an amazing thing, and I know there's only 2 minutes. Of course, if people want to throw me questions to my LinkedIn /in, automation's my username. I'm always happy. Jason will tell you I respond pretty much every 10 minutes anyway. There's also my book on artificial intelligence for software testing, the full version. Don't use your phone to scan that. Just take a photo now, use that on your browser, and then just right click and download the entire book. Then you don't have to sign up or anything else. You don't need to give your details across anyway. But I definitely recommend that. That's from the working committee of the ISO 29119 part 11 for testing of artificial intelligence systems by Rex Black as well. So he's in there. So anyway, I'm sorry I couldn't be there today. Have a me later on. And again, massive thanks to everyone at PNS QAC for inviting me to this event.